"You're a disgrace to our name." The words sliced through the air like a knife. Caroline stood frozen, champagne glass in hand, surrounded by applause and candlelight. It was her father's 70th birthday, a grand celebration in a vineyard estate she had paid for. She had just given a heartfelt toast honoring his sacrifices and strength, and that was his response. People fell silent. Her siblings looked away. Her mother pretended to straighten the tablecloth. No one said a word. In that moment, Caroline realized something terrifying. No amount of success could buy her father's respect. But what if his hatred wasn't about disappointment, but control? If you've ever felt unseen by the ones you love most, this story is for you. Like, comment, and subscribe because the truth deserves to be heard. Caroline was the kind of daughter every parent claimed to want, driven, loyal, and endlessly self-sacrificing. By the age of 33, she had built a multi-million-dollar logistics tech company from scratch that paid off her family's mortgage, funded her brother's failed startups, and covered her sister's med school tuition. She didn't date. She didn't travel. Every dollar, every hour went back into building something for them. Her father, Harold, was a retired Army officer turned small-town lawyer. He believed in order, silence, and respect for authority. Praise was rare affection, even rarer. Still, Caroline thought that if she worked hard enough, if she made the family name proud, maybe, just maybe, he'd finally look at her with something other than quiet disapproval. But as the years passed, that moment never came. And now, after funding his lavish birthday gala and offering a public tribute, she stood humiliated before the very man she'd spent her life trying to please. What she didn't know yet was this: her father's disdain wasn't rooted in her failure to obey, but in his fear of what she had become. But to understand why Harold's resentment ran so deep, we have to go back to Caroline's childhood, where obedience was survival and rebellion came at a price. Caroline's earliest memories weren't of bedtime stories or birthday cakes. They were of standing still, standing straight, hands at her side, while her father inspected her report card like a military checklist. In calculus, he asked once, tapping the paper without looking up. That's how laziness starts. She was 12. Love in the Macmillan household was conditional. Harold believed children were investments, poor discipline, and get achievement out. Caroline, the eldest of three, quickly realized that the only way to stay safe was to be perfect. She learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to apologize even when she didn't understand what she'd done wrong, to make herself small when her father entered the room. Her mother, a gentlewoman worn thin by years of silent compliance, offered comfort only in hushed tones and hurried gestures. "Don't take it personally," she whispered once after Harold berated Caroline for winning second place in a state math competition. "He just wants the best for you." But it never felt like that. When she was 16, Caroline got her first job stocking shelves at a local warehouse. By 18, she was coding inventory software in the back room, teaching herself Python from a library book because she couldn't afford classes. No one in her family ever asked why she worked so hard. They just took the checks when she sent them home. By 21, she'd launched a software tool that revolutionized fleet tracking for small logistics firms. Her first big client was a local trucking company with outdated systems and a lot of trust in her quiet confidence. The product worked. Within 2 years, Caroline had a small office, 3 employees, and contracts across 5 states. And not once did her father congratulate her. Instead, he warned her, "You're becoming arrogant." That's how people lose everything. Her brother Kyle burned through 2 business loans she co-signed. Her sister Emily changed majors 3 times each semester, paid by Caroline's growing income. Still, Caroline kept giving. Not because they deserved it, but because she thought she did. Somewhere inside her, the voice of the 12-year-old still whispered, "Maybe if I'm useful enough, they'll love me." The logistics company grew to 20 employees, then 40, then international expansion. She never married, never took a vacation. Her assistant once asked why she answered emails at 3 a.m. "I don't sleep well," Caroline replied. But the truth was harder. She was afraid to stop moving. Because what would she find in the stillness? By her 30s, Caroline had become a quiet powerhouse in her field, respected, efficient, and discreet. But at home, she was still just Caroline, the girl who didn't hug too tightly, Who paid for Christmas but didn't decorate the tree? Who kept her pain to herself? The disapproval became passive-aggressive. Her father once introduced her to an old army friend as our little tech girl sits in front of screens all day. When she offered to host a family reunion at her Santa Barbara villa, he refused. We're not interested in flaunting wealth. Caroline began to notice small things too. Her emails to the family went unanswered. Her calls returned late, if at all. If she didn't show up for a birthday or graduation, it was expected. If she did, she was treated like a guest in her own bloodline. Still, the final crack didn't come until that 70th birthday gala. Caroline had arranged everything flown and distant cousins booked a jazz quartet, printed custom wine labels with Harold's face on them. She had spent weeks on a toast trying to find the words to honor a man who had never honored her. She called him my first teacher, a man of discipline and strength, and the reason I never gave up. The applause that followed felt warm. For a moment, she thought maybe this is it. Maybe this is the night he finally sees me. But when he stood up, raised his glass and said, "You may have money, Caroline, but you've lost your place in this family. You're a disgrace to our name." The room froze. She looked around at the people she'd loved, protected, carried. No one stopped him. No one said, "That's too far." No one came after her when she walked out. That night in the back of the Uber, her hands trembling on her lap, Caroline whispered to herself, "Something's wrong with this picture." And for the first time in her life, she stopped blaming herself and started questioning him. She remembered a moment years ago when her lawyer had mentioned something strange about her company's equity distribution. "There's a childhood trust tied into your business formation," he said. "Do you know who set it up?" At the time, she was too busy scaling to dig into the details. But now, something didn't sit right. It was time to go back. To the paperwork. To the signatures. To the money trail. Because maybe Harold wasn't just emotionally cruel. Maybe he had stolen more than her peace. And what Caroline uncovered next didn't just break her heart, it shattered everything she thought she knew about loyalty, legacy, and blood. The Monday after the birthday fiasco, Caroline sat alone in her home office, the party dress still hanging over the back of a chair like a ghost. Her fingers hovered over her laptop, then moved with steady purpose. She had always been precise, especially with numbers, and now numbers were the only thing that could help her make sense of the chaos. She pulled out incorporation documents, tax records, equity ledgers. It was all there, buried in the fine print, cloaked under legalese, but there. 15 years ago, when she first formalized her business, her father had insisted she use his trusted friend as the corporate lawyer. "You're young," he had said. "Let someone experienced set up the foundation." Caroline, then just 22, and still hoping to impress him, agreed without question. And that's when he struck. Hidden deep in the formation paperwork was a trust, the Harold McMillan Family Security Trust, which quietly claimed a 25% stake in her company. On paper, it was set up for the long-term benefit of the McMillan family. In practice, it gave Harold voting rights, quarterly dividends, and even access to confidential company data. She stared at the screen in disbelief. She had been sending her family monthly stipends, thinking it was her own generosity. But those checks, they were Harold's dividends he had taken from her without asking, legally, quietly. And worst of all, she had signed it all. In that moment, something snapped inside her, not with rage, but with clarity. Her life hadn't been hijacked at the gala. It had been hijacked long ago, with a pen and a lie dressed up as love. The first thing she did was fire the accounting firm. The second was hire a forensic financial investigator. Over the next few weeks, she learned just how much of her company had been quietly bled for family priorities, a beach house in Florida for retirement she never knew they owned. Private school tuitions for cousins she hadn't seen in years. A $70K payment labeled as legacy honorarium later revealed to be hush money for a woman Harold had fathered a child with in the 80s. But it wasn't just betrayal that haunted her, it was the realization that everyone else knew. Her mother, her siblings, even her Uncle George, who once asked her for a loan to save his law firm. It wasn't a loan. It was a payout from her own trust. For days, Caroline didn't sleep. She didn't eat much either. Instead, she did what she always did when the world went silent on her. She made a plan. She consulted a new legal team. You could sue, one of them said. Breach of fiduciary duty, misrepresentation, coercion. But Caroline shook her head. No, that's his game. I'm playing mine. Instead, she took meetings. Discreetly. She scheduled coffee with key investors, planned handoffs with Grace, and sold her remaining shares in the company strategically, not in retaliation, but in liberation. Her final deal was poetic. She sold her majority share to a woman-owned tech fund that supported first-gen entrepreneurs. Let this company become what I never had, she said during the closing. The check she received would have made headlines had she wanted it to. She didn't. With the proceeds, Caroline left California and moved to New Mexico. She bought a small ranch near Taos and turned one of the barns into a retreat center. She called it the Daughters Foundation, a space for women raised in controlling families, silenced by power, gaslit into gratitude. She started small 3 beds, one counselor and her. But the stories that poured in, women who were told they were too sensitive, girls who built empires just to earn a nod, mothers who feared becoming their own parents. Caroline finally found her people not in DNA, but in truth. 6 months after the gala, her memoir was published, The Price of Obedience. The title alone stirred conversations in boardrooms and book clubs alike. It wasn't a tell-all, it was a guide, a map, a mirror. Within weeks, it hit bestseller lists. She gave talks, sat on panels, and met daughters who whispered, "Thank you. I thought I was crazy." But just as the dust was beginning to settle, a thick envelope arrived, postmarked from her father's law firm. Inside, a cease and desist. Your public statements, it read, have caused irreparable damage to the reputation of the McMillan family. You are instructed to refrain from all further publication or distribution. Caroline read it, then laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. She didn't call her lawyer. She didn't respond. Instead, she had it framed, hung right behind her desk at the foundation. Below it, a plaque, "Legacy is chosen, not inherited." But the true twist came not from Harold, but from Emily. One afternoon, Caroline opened her front gate to find her younger sister standing there, suitcase in hand, mascara smudged. "I left him," she said. Him, who Dad, his house, his way of living. She looked older than Caroline remembered, not in years, but in wear. "I read your book," Emily said, "and I realized I'm not just tired, I'm free." That night they sat by the fire. No accusations, no blame, just silence, safe silence. And for once, Caroline didn't feel like the eldest child holding it all together. She felt like a sister, a woman, herself. But even with the truth exposed and her new life blooming, Caroline's story was far from over, because karma doesn't always arrive on schedule, but when it does, it demands a reckoning. It started with a voicemail. Caroline Harold's voice crackled through the receiver one rainy afternoon. "We need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding." She stared at her phone for a long time. The same man who called her a disgrace. The same man who tried to silence her with lawyers. Now he wanted to talk. A week later, she received an invitation hand-delivered this time, embossed in gold ink, formal cold. The Harold McMillan Legacy Forum, Private Gathering and Family Trust Review. Attendance requested Caroline McMillan. No apology, no explanation, just another performance dressed up as reconciliation. Emily urged her not to go. "He doesn't want peace," she warned. "He wants control." But something in Caroline stirred. Not curiosity, not hope. Something sharper, something surgical. "I'm not going for closure," she said. "I'm going to end something." The event was held at the McMillan estate, the house she'd grown up in, the house where praise had been scarce, but expectations filled every hallway. She hadn't been there in years. She arrived deliberately late, hair tied back, dressed in slate gray, calm, unshakable. When she stepped into the foyer, heads turned, some out of habit, some out of discomfort. She didn't flinch. The gathering was small, just family and Harold's close associates. A long oak table filled the center of the room. At the head, Harold sat like a king nearing the end of his reign. "Caroline," he said with a stiff nod, as though they were colleagues at a board meeting, not father and daughter. She sat without a word. A man from the family's law firm began a presentation about legacy redistribution, citing trust, restructuring, and strategic image rehabilitation in light of recent public exposure. Caroline recognized the buzzwords, instantly control containment spin. Then Harold stood. His voice still carried that authoritarian timbre, but it lacked the edge of certainty. Age had softened his face but hardened his pride. Families fracture under stress, he began. But we rebuild. That's what Macmillans do. We overcome. Caroline nearly laughed. He wasn't rebuilding. He was rebranding. Then he looked at her. You've done damage, Caroline. Unnecessary, avoidable damage. But it's not too late. You still have equity in this name. We're willing to reintegrate you conditionally. Conditionally. The room waited, unsure whether they were witnessing a peace treaty or a trap. Caroline rose slowly, letting the silence breathe. She scanned their faces, her cousins, her siblings, even her mother, who looked everywhere except at her. And then she spoke. Let me be clear, she said. I'm not here for forgiveness. I didn't ask to be reintegrated. I built something from nothing while you all fed off it. I was obedient and you called it arrogance. I was generous and you called it duty. You took everything and gave nothing back but shame. She pulled a folder from her bag and dropped it on the table with a loud thud. Inside were printed records, the hidden trust, the equity trail, the forged signatures from when she was underage. I didn't publish this in my book, but I could. And I will unless you stop contacting me. I want it on record. You relinquish all claims to my name, my business history, and my future work. Gasps. A cousin cursed under his breath. Her brother stood up red-faced, but Harold didn't speak, so Caroline turned to him directly. You told me I was a disgrace, but the truth is you're ashamed of yourself. You were never building a family. You were building a monument to your own control. And then, her voice cracked not from weakness, but from the unbearable pressure of a truth long buried. I begged for your love, and you gave me conditions. I gave you my life, and you took credit for it. You didn't raise a daughter, you manufactured a product. Well, I'm done being your prototype. The room was dead silent, and then Harold finally responded. You'll regret this, he said. Caroline took a step closer to him. No. You will regret not knowing the woman I became when I stopped needing your permission. She turned and walked out, but just before she reached the door, her mother quiet faded. Ghost-like grabbed her hand. I knew, she whispered. Her eyes welled with decades of silence. I knew what he did. I didn't know how to stop it. Caroline's jaw clenched. Part of her wanted to yank her hand away, but the child inside her still longed for a mother. I'm not mad that you were weak, she said. I'm sad you never tried to get strong. And with that, she left. Back in New Mexico, Caroline collapsed on her cabin's porch swing and sobbed not from pain, but from release. All her life she had been trained to climb higher, run, faster, prove harder. But now there was nothing to prove, no role to fill, no version of herself to defend. She was done being the good daughter. She was finally just Caroline. Later that month, she received a message anonymous but clearly from inside the family. A photo of Harold in the hospital following what was described as a minor cardiac event. No plea, no apology, just facts. She stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it. She wasn't cold, she wasn't cruel, she was just done. And it was in that stillness, that quiet defiance, that Caroline found her new purpose, not as a survivor of legacy, but as the author of her own. Because after the storm always comes the moment of choice. The desert had a way of demanding stillness. Caroline sat on the porch of her adobe-style home in Taos, New Mexico, sipping coffee laced with cinnamon, staring at the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. It had been 3 months since the confrontation with her family, and in that time she had done something she'd never allowed herself before. Nothing. No conference calls, no board meetings, no 5-year plans. Just long walks through dry canyons, pages filled with unsent letters, and silent dinners lit only by candlelight and the setting sun. She wasn't hiding, she was shedding. Years of pretending, years of bending, years of hoping her worth would finally be seen. One morning, a dusty old Ford pulled into her gravel driveway. Emily stepped out carrying a tote bag full of groceries and a folder under her arm. Still allergic to Wi-Fi, she teased. Caroline smiled. I'll die free of Zoom meetings if it kills me. They laughed. It was a quiet, sisterly kind of laugh, the kind born not from jokes, but from relief. Emily had become more than a friend. She was a mirror one that reflected who Caroline was becoming, not who she had to be. Over lunch, Emily slid the folder across the table. I know you're in healing mode, she said, but read this when you're ready. Inside were dozens of emails, letters from women who had read The Price of Obedience, some anonymous, some not. Each one a mosaic of pain and survival. My father was just like yours. Your story gave me language I didn't have. I left my house last week. I'm scared, but I'm free. I'm 62. It's taken me this long to stop apologizing for my ambition. Thank you for showing me it's not too late. You said, legacy is chosen. I think today I'm choosing mine. Caroline's throat tightened. She ran her fingers over the printed pages as if they were sacred. I didn't know she whispered. Emily leaned in. You didn't write that book for them. But they needed you to. For years, Caroline had built empires with metrics and markets. Now she was building something else meaning. That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked barefoot through her home, simple sun-washed, lined with warm wood and open bookshelves. She passed the framed cease and desist letter from her father hanging above her fireplace like a badge of honor. Below it, her own handwritten addition. Legacy is chosen, not inherited. She stood in front of it for a long time, then took a deep breath and opened her laptop for the first time in weeks. She knew what she needed to do. By morning, she had filed the paperwork. The Obedience Project was born a nonprofit foundation that would offer therapy stipends, legal aid, and career mentorship to daughters of abusive narcissistic or perfectionist fathers. Not just emotional support, but concrete, liberating resources. Within a month, her first grant was approved. Within 3, a quiet office space with desert light and glass doors was opened in Santa Fe. She painted the walls herself, bought mismatched furniture from thrift shops. She refused to let it look corporate. She wanted it to feel like a second chance. On opening day, she hosted a small gathering. No ribbon cutting, no speeches. Just coffee community and a circle of women who carried stories like hers, some cracked wide open, some still wrapped in silence. A young woman named Becca approached her after the event. Barely 20, fidgeting with a bracelet, eyes hollowed by recent escape. My dad still sends letters, she said quietly. Tells me I'll die alone, that I'll never be anything without him. Caroline didn't flinch. Do you believe him? She asked. Becca shook her head. Not anymore. Not since I read your book. Caroline smiled. Not the polished smile of a CEO. A real one. You already did the hardest part, she said. You left. Now you get to choose what comes next. Becca nodded, tears in her eyes. Caroline placed a hand over her own heart, softly, gently. That voice in your head that still sounds like him, she said. Replace it with yours. And just like that, the weight Caroline had carried for decades began to lift, not because it disappeared, but because she was finally strong enough to share it. Weeks later, a lawyer representing her father called, offered to reopen negotiations. Caroline didn't even blink. Tell him, she said, that I don't need his name. I've already built something bigger than it. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was leaving something behind. She was standing in exactly the place she had spent a lifetime trying to reach herself. And when a choice this powerful is made, the ripple effect is inevitable, because the moment you reclaim your voice, the world, especially the one that once silenced you, starts to tremble. When Caroline declined the offer to reopen negotiations, the response was swift. A week later, a formal letter arrived, this time from her father himself. It was scathing. He accused her of dragging the family name through the mud of creating unnecessary drama for personal gain. He demanded that she take down the foundation's name, remove the book from print, and issue a public apology. She didn't respond with words. She responded with a press conference. Standing in front of the Obedience Project's new headquarters, Caroline looked directly into the cameras flanked by 24 women survivors, advocates, daughters who once shrank themselves to fit their father's shadows. I built this foundation not to hurt anyone. she said, voice clear and calm, but because for too long too many of us were taught that silence is loyalty and obedience is love. That ends now. The video went viral overnight. Millions watched. Tens of thousands shared their own stories. And then came the twist. A former board member from Caroline's tech firm stepped forward with documents, proof that her father had been siphoning money through the family trust and funneling it into offshore accounts, all while publicly condemning Caroline for chasing greed. The hypocrisy exploded online. Headlines screamed, "Disgraced patriarch exposed in daughter's rise. She funded their lives. They called her a disgrace." Karma wears heels. Caroline's story inspires global movement. Her father's reputation crumbled. Speaking invitations dried up. Business partners pulled away. For the first time, he was the one facing whispers behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Caroline's book soared back to the top of the bestseller list. Donations to her foundation tripled, and women, some in boardrooms, some in shelters, started quoting her signature line, "Legacy is chosen, not inherited." She hadn't taken revenge. She had spoken her truth, and the truth did the rest. But in every great reckoning, there must come peace. And for Caroline, the true triumph wasn't what she lost or gained, but what she finally made room for. On a quiet morning, Caroline sat beneath a cottonwood tree on the edge of her foundation's garden, watching a group of young women plant lavender in the spring soil. Laughter filled the air, soft and real, not forced, not earned, just allowed. She no longer felt the need to prove herself, not to her father, not to the world, not even to the version of herself that once thought love had to be bought with sacrifice. Her worth was no longer measured in what she gave up to please others, but in what she chose to protect her voice, her peace, her boundaries. Caroline didn't just build a legacy. She rewrote the rules for what legacy could mean. To anyone who's been called too much ungrateful or a disgrace for simply being who you are, this is your reminder. You don't need permission to heal. You don't owe loyalty to pain, and you are allowed to walk away from anything that demands you shrink. If Caroline's story spoke to you, share it. Subscribe. Or better yet, tell your own. Because someone out there is still waiting for permission to begin, and maybe your voice will be the one that sets them free.